Few would accuse Gingrich of lacking intelligence. Judgment and wisdom, yes, but intelligence he had in spades. Ditto et joie de vivre. Gingrich was charismatic, but grandiose. He was a leading example of a new breed of politician who understood public relations and marketing far better than the old bulls who had been running Congress for decades. Some of Gingrich's innovations, such as the theatrical made-for-TV speech on the House floor, still plague us today. As Catherine Seeley reported in the New York Times in 1994, Mr. Gingrich made his name in the House by denouncing the Democrats on the floor while the cameras rolled. What they did not show, because they were locked into a narrow field of vision, was that Mr. Gingrich was hurling his barbs at an empty chamber when his victims could not respond. Thankfully for conservatives, the Reagan era did not end with Reagan. Bill Clinton figured out he was still operating under a conservative paradigm. The downside for Republicans, however, was that Clinton was ideologically flexible and strategically sophisticated enough to simply co-opt their ideas, including balanced budgets and welfare reform, while snookering them into major missteps like shutting down the government. The end of the Clinton years was marked by his impeachment over the Monica Lewinsky affair, which ironically turned out to be another political misfire by congressional Republicans. It's hard to blame them. Clinton was impeached by the House of Representatives on charges of perjury and obstruction of justice. No small thing. Republicans probably assumed impeaching Clinton would turn him into Richard Nixon, a disgraced shell of a man. Instead, he only seemed to grow more popular. Ironically, the politicians taken down by the scandal were Gingrich, who was carrying on his own affair but was pushed out after Republicans had a disappointing midterm in the 1998 run-up to impeachment, and the man who was set to replace him as Speaker, Representative Bob Livingston, who quickly acknowledged his own adultery. Clinton would leave office in 2000 with high approval numbers. By then, conservatism seemed to be struggling, or at least in need of reinvention. George W. Bush provided that during the 2000 election, albeit without winning the popular vote. A permanent governing majority? For a while, it seemed like we had it all figured out. Just stick to the tried and true conservative doctrine that had worked since 1980, and then soften it up a tad. That was essentially the winning formula that George W. Bush used in 2000. He called it compassionate conservatism. The theory was to keep everyone in the conservative coalition happy, and then inoculate himself against the predictable charges that Republicans are uncompassionate and mean-spirited. By following this strategy, Bush hoped to do better with Hispanics. As he said, family values do not stop at the Rio Grande River. African Americans, some of whom Bush thought might like his proposal on faith-based initiatives, or the fact that Colin Powell and Condi Rice were key players in his administration. And soccer moms, who might share some conservative values, but would be turned off by the harsh conservative rhetoric that had emerged during the Clinton years. September 11th, however, changed everything. It's worth pausing to consider what would have happened had the 9/11 attacks not occurred. The magnitude of that day was so great that without it, much of the American political landscape and certainly the conservative movement would be different today. Might George Bush have been remembered for compassionate conservatism instead of the Iraq War and waterboarding? Absent the Iraq War that followed, does Barack Obama get elected? Does he even speak at the 2004 Democratic Convention where he first made a major national splash? Unlikely, since John Kerry probably isn't the nominee. Does Hillary Clinton win the 2008 nomination that year because she wasn't forced to take a tough vote authorizing military force in Iraq? As I type these words, perhaps in some alternate universe, Republican President Colin Powell is wrapping up his second term, and Vice President Condi Rice is already the frontrunner for the 2016 Republican nomination. Instead, 9/11 caused millions of formerly apolitical or apathetic people to suddenly discover their country was in trouble and they had to make up for lost time. Some of these new conservatives were very smart, but few were full-spectrum conservatives, and even fewer had a Burkean conservative temperament. Nevertheless, the zealotry of the convert is a powerful thing, and many of these folks took to blogs and emerging media outlets, and in some cases, advanced fringe theories. Take, for example, the case of Pamela Geller, a blogger the New York Times described in 2010 as waging a form of holy war through Atlas Shrugs, a website that attacks Islam with a rhetoric venomous enough that PayPal at one point branded it a hate site. September 11th drove Miss Geller to her keyboard. She had barely heard of Osama bin Laden.